Distinguished Special Envoy Mr. Xi Jinping and Editor-in-Chief Mr. Gao Yaming and Mr. Robin Rood and Mr. Turk, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Welcome to attend today's seminar. It is hosted by China Renmin University and CIPG, which is co-organized by RDCY and the Academy of Contemporary China and World Studies at SIPG. Welcome to attend this live seminar. And today it is, marks the 1-year anniversary of China's double carbon goal. Please allow me to introduce the speakers for this session. They are Mr. Liu Wei, President of Renmin University of China, and Mr. Gao Yanming, Deputy Head of Chief Editor of China International Publishing Group. Now let's welcome Mr. Liu Wei to deliver the speech through the virtual meeting manner. Let's welcome. Distinguished China Special Representative on Climate Change, distinguished Deputy Head of CIPG, Mr. Gao Yanming, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Welcome, and President Xi Jinping put forward the concept of carbon peak by 2030 and carbon neutrality by 2060, and 1 year later, we are gathering here to attend this seminar hosted by China Renmin University and CIPG and co-organized by RDCY as well as the ACCWS of CIPG. And first of all, on behalf of China Renmin University, I'd like to extend my warm welcome to all of you present here. And also I'd like to congratulate the release of this research report to realize carbon neutrality and peak. It is the important strategic decisions made by China's party committee, and it's very important for China's sustainability as well as the community of a shared future. And on September the 22nd, the presidency made the promise at the 75th UN General Assembly to put forward this target. It is the guidance for us to promote carbon peak and carbon neutrality. Over the past 1 year, we uphold the common community of a shared future to carry forward the common values of mankind. We followed the spirit of the 5th plenary session of the 19th Party Congress. We have taken concrete measures to realize carbon peak and neutrality. For example, we have set up the nationwide first carbon neutrality garbage classification station in Chengdu of Sichuan province. We have set up the carbon neutrality pilot zone in Xinjiang, Henan province. And also we have launched the nationwide carbon trading market. And also we have launched green credit and bonds. With concerted efforts, the carbon peak and carbon neutrality concepts have been well ingrained in people's minds, and much progress has been made. By the end of last year, China's carbon intensity has reduced by 48.4% compared with the level of 2005. The share of non-fossil fuel to the primary energy has accounted for 15.9%, overachieving our goal by 2020. Actually, from the long-term perspective, China will continue to make more contribution to the climate change. And at the same time, we should be aware that it's a long way to go to realize carbon peak and carbon neutrality. According to EU's targets, 60 years to realize carbon neutrality. But as for China, from carbon peak to carbon neutrality, we only have 30 years to go. We are facing tighter time schedule, as well as the bigger emission reduction target. China is the world's biggest developing country. With this condition, it means that we cannot copy the developed countries' practice blindly. We must explore the more appropriate approach for China to realize carbon peak and neutrality. We need to explore this new double carbon path, which is more suitable for Chinese conditions. We need the cooperation and collaboration among different parties. As the first, formal university set up by CPC, China Renmin University seeks to the face and destiny of CPC, and we would continue to use our advantages to help the society to better understand the world, carry forward civilization, innovate theories, and educate people and better serve the society so that we could serve as the better think tanks for social and economic development. And over these years, Renmin University has consolidated our resources and advantages. We rely on Chongyang Institute, as well as China Development and Strategy Research Institute, and some other institutes to conduct in-depth analysis centering around civilization and carbon peak and neutrality. Since this year, in order to implement the spirit of President Xi Jinping's ecological civilization, as well as the concept of carbon peak and carbon neutrality, we have set up the Ecological Civilization Research Institute, and on this Saturday, we would, hold the meeting to celebrate the launch of our common prosperity and double carbon, as well as state-owned economic research institute. And today, we have invited so many heavyweights. We hope that all of you could exchange viewpoints. We hope that you could exchange your wisdom, and we hope that everyone could contribute to carbon peak and neutrality. I hope that today's seminar is a complete success. Thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Liu's speech. From the macro level, he explains China's efforts in achieving carbon neutrality and the peak, and what China could do to deal with the global climate change. I feel that as China, this is a great power. We have the responsibility to deal with the global warming. And now let's welcome Chief Editor from CIPG, Mr. Gao Anming, to deliver the speech. Let's welcome. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, friends, good evening. As for the US friends, I should say good morning to you. I'm very honored to be here to attend this virtual meeting to commemorate the one-year anniversary of the concept of carbon peak and neutrality put forward by President Xi 1 year ago. And I'm very happy to be here to tell you China's double carbon progress. And on behalf of one of the organizers, CIPG, I would like to extend my warm congratulations on the opening of this seminar. China is the important participants, contributors, and leaders in ecological civilization building. Not long ago, at the 100th anniversary of the founding of CPC, President Xi said that we should promote harmony between man and nature. We need to promote prosperity and development of Chinese nation and the country. It shows that China would like to work together with others to protect our planet, to promote sustainability. It shows that over the recent years, we've seen the highest average temperatures, and the extreme weathers have inflicted huge losses upon us. Therefore, we need to exchange views on carbon neutrality. It's very important for us to exchange viewpoints on building the community of a shared future, I'd like to share with you the following 3 points. First, to realize carbon neutrality is the important reflection of the priority of better environment. China is the biggest developing country in the world with the massive population as well as the economic scale. China's carbon emission tops the world, but according to the investigation and survey, in terms of the per capita level, China only ranks number 11 around the world. If we put it in the per capita level, and it is only 45% of the number 2, that is US. China is the largest manufacturer in the world and is still in the fast developing stage. It's hard for us to reduce the emissions of the carbon. Together with the external shocks such as COVID-19 and some other factors, China will face more challenges to realize carbon neutrality. China opposes the concept of the environment protection for China, and China prioritizes the ecological civilization. China has paid a lot of prices for it. We stick to the harmony between man and nature. Secondly, to realize carbon neutrality is the voluntary action for us to realize a better China. China has written ecological civilization into its constitution, and it has been integrated into the overall framework of socialism with Chinese characteristics. And while promoting per capita GDP growth rate, we hope that our per capita carbon emission will be closer to the world's average level by the end of 2020. China's clean energy consumption has accounted for almost 25% of the overall energy consumption. As for solar and wind installed capacity and power generation tops the world. As for per capita CO2 emission, has reduced by almost 50% over the level of 2005. From 2021 to 2025, the energy consumption per unit of GDP and CO2 emissions will be down by 13.5% and 18% respectively. Third, to realize carbon neutrality is the important target for us to exchange views on civilization, on the ecological civilization building. And on September the 10th, President Xi and Biden, talk a lot of points in this aspect over the phone, and both sides have decided to promote the dialogues and cooperation on climate change. And in April this year in Shanghai, both sides have launched the joint declaration of climate change coping between the two sides, and they're committed to promoting the success of UK's Glasgow COP26 meeting. And China has incorporated the ecological civilization building as one of the priorities in BRI. And yesterday, President Xi at the 76th UN General Assembly said that China would be committed to promote green development and low carbon development. China will now to set up more offshore, coal plants. It shows that China has a strong responsibility.
As the comprehensive international professional media organization, China International Publishing Group has been paying great attention to the international exchanges, corporations, and helped to establish a series of platforms for exchange of ideas regarding eco-civilization, and also providing to the market a series of Chinese civilization, eco-civilization related storytelling, books, and multimedia products. So, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, to further enhance the exchange of ideas between us on carbon neutrality is very important. More efforts from the global market should be involved, and we are sincerely hoping that, and we are also ready to cooperate with all the friends here, working together on international environmental governance and the systematic establishment to working together for the future, for the community of shared future for humankind, and also to establish good examples in practice. We don't have a plan B, so let's join hands and get to work done. Finally, I would like to wish this event a great success. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Chief Editor Gao Anming. Thank you so much for sharing with us from the global perspective on the status quo of the global market, as well as what kind of challenges China are going to be confronted with to achieve the goal of carbon neutrality. So again, thank you so much for the opening remarks, both by Mr. Gao and Mr. Liu. So now I'd like to give the floor to the next moderator for the second session, Mr. Yu Yunquan, President of the Academy of Contemporary China and World Studies. Thank you so much, Mr. Yuan Chun. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, it's a great honor for me on behalf of the Academy of Contemporary China and World Studies of China International Publishing Group to be the moderator of this session. And thank you so much. I was very impressed by the opening remarks. And for my session here, I would like to introduce briefly. We are very honored to have Mr. Daniel Turk, Mr. Xie Zhenhua, and Mr. Kevin Rudd to share with us their observations. So now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Daniel Turk.
President of the Renmin University of China, Mr. Gao Anming, Deputy Head and Chief Editor of China Foreign Languages Publishing Administration, Mr. Wang Wen, Executive Dean of the Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies, fellow keynote speakers and panelists, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure and honor to address you on this occasion. We are about to discuss a critically important global issue of transformation of the world, the transformation into a carbon neutral world. And the role of China will be central to this transformation. I congratulate the Chongyang Institute for the research report, Carbon Neutral China in Action. This report will be released in a few minutes. I look forward to studying the report carefully. Meanwhile, I wish to make a few basic comments that, in my opinion, deserve special attention. Now, the world is currently at an inflection point, and there is a fundamental choice to be made. In his recent report, Our Common Agenda, the United Nations Secretary General defined a stark, fundamental choice that is confronting all of us. And I quote, "To continue with the business as usual and risk significant breakdown and perpetual crisis, or to make a concerted effort to break through and achieve an international system that delivers for people and the planet." End of quotation. Now, the problem of global warming is at the center of this fundamental, historically important choice. The humankind risks crossing an irreversible threshold and accelerating crises that could take centuries or even millennia to reverse. If there were any doubts about the looming disaster, the latest report of the International Panel on Climate Change dispelled them irreversibly. Now, none of these realizations is new. They have been discussed in great detail in the past, and the basic needs of a new and concerted effort are becoming clear. The future of the world will be carbon neutral. Otherwise, there may be no future at all. It is very welcome and indeed essential that China has made its commitment to carbon neutrality so strongly. Let us recall President Xi Jinping speaking at the United Nations General Assembly about a year ago, reiterated China's commitment to the Paris Agreement on climate change. And he pledged to scale up the policies and measures taken in China. Moreover, he emphasized the aim of China to achieve, and I quote, CO2 emissions to peak before 2030 and carbon neutrality before 2060, unquote. Now, this was a pledge of historic significance. China promised to achieve the shortest ever time distance between carbon peak and carbon neutral. Therefore, the question today is what needs to be done to achieve the existential objective of carbon neutral within 30 or 40 years, a short period. Well, this is the key question for all the major powers of the world, and it is encouraging that most of the main players have started to devise effective instruments to achieve the objective of carbon neutrality. In Europe, a region where I live, much is being done to speed up climate action. The European Commission, the executive branch of the European Union, plans to cut greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% before 2030. Now, this sets Europe on a realistic path to becoming carbon neutral by 2050. The policy measures and financial instruments to achieve these objectives are being put in place. The current period of post-COVID-19 recovery is being seized as an opportunity. The current period of post-COVID-19 recovery is an opportunity for financing, and that includes financing of technological transformation and investment in clean energy. The entire European recovery plan provides for financing of about 2 trillion euros. The largest part of that financing, about 30%, will be devoted to fighting climate change. But much is happening in the European banking sector as well. The European Investment Bank, one of the key financial institutions in Europe, plans to provide more than a half of its loans in the period 2021 to 25 to projects needed for climate action and environmental sustainability. In the period 2021 to 2030, the European Investment Bank plans to support 1,000 billion worth of green investments around the world, 1 trillion. And importantly, the European investment is phasing out financing for various projects in fossil fuels. Now, this example illustrates the ongoing change in the European approach to financing and to development more generally. In addition of national and international regulations, the role of the regulators will be significant. Fast progress towards carbon neutral will require climate proofing, ideally of all future investments. All new projects should pass appropriate tests regarding their compatibility with the midterm objectives of reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. This is a big task, but also a necessary one. Now, the two sets of strategic tasks in the field of finance, the one devoted to substantial expansion of green financing, and the other to phasing out financing in fossil fuels, are very demanding. They will require changes in policies, new regulation, and careful coordination of new policies. It is natural that the approaches to these tasks will not be uniform. The approaches that are to be taken in Europe, in China, in the United States, in other countries, are likely to differ. For us in Europe, it will be very interesting to learn about and from the experience in China. The research report of the Chongyang Institute, Carbon Neutral, China in Action, that will be released shortly, will be studied carefully in all parts of the world. At the same time, the experience of any particular global player like China or the European Union will also provide an opportunity for synergies. Global warming is a global phenomenon, and that requires global cooperation. And while the main measures will have to be taken domestically, they should be coordinated internationally to the largest extent possible, so as to create synergy effects. In November this year, the world will meet at the Conference of State Parties of the Convention on Climate Change, COP26 in Glasgow, in the United Kingdom. This will be an important opportunity to strengthen international cooperation. At the same time, this will be an important political barometer, an opportunity to test the actual political atmosphere and to assess the scope of the possible. And we have to be realistic. The differences among major players are still significant. The developing countries are still suffering the dual problem of their traditionally weak capacity and the additional stress caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. And the general political atmosphere in the world is not good. The state parties must do their utmost to reduce their differences and to strengthen their cooperation. In addition, much can be done within the business sector and in the financial industry themselves. The transformation necessitates progress towards carbon neutral world, and this brings significant risks. Those risks relate to the actual effects of new technologies, as well as to the pace of phasing out fossil fuels and to management of transition to green technologies and to renewable energy. This calls for a rethinking of the notions of international competition and cooperation. Competition alone will not suffice for the needed results. Cooperation may require new forms of sharing knowledge and experience. International rules on intellectual property will have to be designed in new ways to allow the needed progress to happen. All this will require more communication, more cooperation, and something that I would call safe space consultations. Such consultations should be organized within and among the interested businesses and in financial institutions within countries and internationally. They will have to be as much as possible free from political pressure and political rivalry. Is such a synergy-oriented approach through safe space consultations of the future possible at all? Well, I hope it is. Let us remember the basic message of the UN Secretary General. To continue business as usual creates a risk of significant background and perpetual crisis. What is needed is a concerted effort to break through and achieve an international system that delivers for people and for the planet. There is much learning needed for the concerted efforts advocated by the UN Secretary General. And I consider our seminar today a contribution in this learning. I wish this global seminar all success and a productive journey on the path we are starting today. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. Turk, for your keynote speech. Thank you for sharing with us from the European perspective and introduce to us the updates regarding the global transition to a carbon neutrality related world, and also about the carbon neutrality as well as the role China is going to play. And also thank you for emphasizing on the concepts of cooperation and synergy. We are so impressed by the highlight of the word cooperation. So next I would like to give the floor to Mr. Xie Zhenhua. Because of some reason, Mr. Xie Zhenhua is not able to join us here in this room, so his colleague will be helping him to deliver the keynote speech. Mr. Li.
I'm very honored to deliver this speech on behalf of Mr. Xie Zhenhua. And 1 year anniversary of carbon neutrality, China's responsibility. carbon neutrality, China in action. Distinguished former President Turk and former President Kevin Rudd and President Liu Wei, distinguished friends, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. And 1 year ago, President Xi announced that China would try to realize carbon peak by 2030 and carbon neutrality by 2060. It is the important strategic decisions made by China's CPC. It is essential for China's sustainability and the community of a shared future. China is the world's largest developing country. Carbon peak and neutrality targets mean that China would realize the biggest emission reduction target with the shortest time period to realize this goal. And when it comes to carbon peak, the per capita GDP and per capita emission will be lower than so many developed countries such as the US, Japan, the European countries. It needs us to make a lot of efforts to realize these goals. Over the past 1 year, China has incorporated these double carbon goals into our ecological civilization building system. We have taken a lot of actions to deal with it. The Party Committee and State Council have set up the carbon peak and neutrality working group. We have organized the carbon peak and neutrality 1+N policy system. We have the high-level designs, and also we have so many action plans. Departments and ministries have taken a lot of policy measures to, as for different provinces and cities, they have actively laid out the double carbon goals implementation during the 14 5-year plan period. Key industries and enterprises have analyzed the green transmission and carbon emission reduction measures. As for the experts and scholars, attach great importance to the research of carbon neutrality and peak. We've seen so many deliverables from the scholars and experts. With such a short period of time, China has shown its appeal and cohesion. It shows the priority attached by government, society, and the general public to realize these double carbon goals. We have the confidence that we would realize the goals put forward by President Xi so that we would make great contribution to the global climate change governance and green and low carbon development. Dear friends, global warming has been the burning issue for mankind. It is our common challenge. Countries should take active measures to deal with it. They should strengthen climate change cooperation to join their hands to build the community of a shared future. Today, two famous think tanks, RDCY and Academy of Contemporary China and World Studies have jointly launched today's live seminar and research report release. We hope that we could tell you that China is making efforts. We hope to cooperate with the international community to promote a green and low carbon transmission and development. I'd like to extend my congratulations on the launch of this report. I hope that experts and scholars, as well as the practitioners, could work harder to contribute to the double carbon targets. Thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Xi's message to today's live seminar by Mr. Li's delivery, and we could feel that Mr. Xi has done a lot to climate change. He has done so many concrete measures. He has mentioned that to cope with climate change, the government and society as a whole have made so many actions to deal with climate change, and it is beneficial for the Committee of a Shared Future. Recently, together with a think tank of Tsinghua University, we organized this ambassadors roundtable. We have invited more than 20 European ambassadors to China. We have invited President Xi during that roundtable meeting, and different delegates have introduced what they were doing in dealing with climate change. Mr. Xi has given us a lot of insights and guidance. And the last speaker for this round is President Kevin Rudd, President of Asia Society Policy Institute and former Prime Minister of Australia. Dear friends, Mr. Xie and President Mr. Liu, dear friends, good evening, everyone. I'd like to thank RDCY for your invitation. I'm very honored to be here to share some thoughts with you. I know that yesterday it was the mid-autumn day, and I wish you happy, healthy, and pleasant. With this full moon in the air, and we should enjoy this union by being together. This poet is beautiful. It has a lot of logic. The beautiful moon is beautiful everywhere. Likewise, climate change and crisis are the same in different parts of the world. Last year, President Xi addressed the UN Assembly meeting, General Assembly, saying that China would realize carbon peak by 2030 and carbon neutrality by 2060. This year, China has put forward the double carbon strategic goals. Over the past 1 year, 30 and 60 double carbon goals have more concrete content. In terms of the double carbon, Central Leaders Work Group has set up. As for the concrete action plans from the central government to the local governments, from governments to enterprises, from the universities to the private sectors, we've seen so many concrete action plans. We are gratifying to see that China has promoted the green finance. POC, NERC, and CSRC have launched the Green Bonds Support Project. It has been implemented since this year. As for some Chinese banks, they have launched the green finance loans, which has almost reached 2 trillion RMB. It shows that China is taking actions to cope with climate change, as well as China's actions and the responsibility to deal with climate change crisis. In the global arena, it has shown China's leadership. Actually, those actions would have the positive impact on the whole world. We should note that by 2060, if China wants to realize carbon neutrality, it means that by 2030, to realize carbon peak, maybe the time is not enough. According to Tsinghua University and Asia Society's research, China needs to realize carbon peak by 2025. At the COP26 UN General Assembly meeting, we need to submit the NDCs. And as for China, it's an opportunity. At COP26 meeting, carbon neutrality would include all kinds of GHG. It means that presidency's promise would be aligned with the global temperature restrictions set forth by Paris Agreement. It means that by 2049, at the 100th anniversary of the new China, China could be the leader to realize carbon neutrality. To be honest, as for China's promise and actions, they're very influential in the international arena. We're gratifying to see that President Xi Jinping has expressed those plans on so many occasions. And also, China has done a lot to contribute to the success of COP26. On the whole, we believe that first, one of the biggest challenges faced by us is climate change and global warming crisis. Secondly, to deal with climate change and solve this crisis, Chinese contribution is very important. Third, China's contribution to this climate change, it is an important opportunity for China to exert the global leadership. I believe that Chinese friends, in order to achieve this goal, it is beneficial for China, it is beneficial for the whole world, and also the mankind. China would do its utmost to achieve this goal. Thank you. Thank you, President Kevin Root, and thank you for your clear-cut viewpoints. I agree with you. Climate change and carbon neutrality are the biggest challenge faced by us. All countries are making actions. It is not unique to China. And also, he mentions the significance of China's actions in this endeavor. It represents his own viewpoint. Actually, Mr. Xie has expressed his viewpoints on China's action by 2030 and 2060. Those targets have been put forward through scientific consultation and discussion, and China would honor those promises. Not long ago, as mentioned by Mr. Gao Yanming, and recently, President Xi said that in terms of the offshore and overseas coal plants, we would stop them, and so it shows China's consistency in our promise. So that's it for this round. Now let's move on to the next session. That is the release of this research report, Carbon Neutrality, China in Action. We would invite Mr. Wang Wen, Executive Dean of RDCY, to release this report and moderate the following session. As welcome. Thank you for your introduction, Mr. Yu, distinguished guests, especially the guests present here. There are so many ambassadors and foreign experts here. Right now, it is almost 9 o'clock in Beijing, and we have so many experts, scholars, and entrepreneurs present here.
And not even to mention our online friends and representatives of our different platforms, including YouTube. At least several hundred thousand people are joined together with us. So it's not difficult for you to figure out the enthusiasm of people both online and offline. So about a year ago, the 2 carbon goals were confirmed by President Xi Jinping on behalf of the Chinese government on the occasion. So for the past year, we were contemplating how can we take actions. So that's why here in my hands, you can see bilingual version of the report. And let me tell you, a lot of pages, about 100 pages for each of the version. And thank you so much for your support. We finally finished the report, which took us about 3 months to summarize what happened in China. Actually, I have prepared a specific presentation. So I have slides, but I do not want to adhere to my original plan. Instead, I would like to share with you 5 highlights which I selected from the report. So 5 highlights here actually means 5 aspects to introduce to you what will be the actions the Chinese government are taking. So number 1 is about the ideology or theory. So in the past year, for the majority of the Chinese population, let me tell you, about a year ago, I don't think they knew what is the concept of carbon neutrality. Just after 1 year, it has become a buzzword or at least a hot topic in the Chinese market. So recalling 1997, that was the very first year human being introduced the specific concept of carbon neutrality, which were included in the Oxford academic glossary, and it used to be an issue regarding government environmental protection. But now we have injected a new value, or we have created in-depth value. So for, let's call the era of Copenhagen conference and then the following era of Paris Agreement. So we have gone through those milestones or areas and finally comes to 2007. That was the first time in China we have the official wording in our document. When it comes to the year of 2015, our Premier Li Keqiang introduced and emphasized the concept of carbon peak, while last year, September 22nd, President Xi Jinping proposed at the General Assembly of the 75th UN General Assembly that China will achieve the both carbon neutrality and carbon peak. And so far, we have put into written paper officially. So if you make a horizontal comparison, and if you consider the global market and the global changes, so we have included a very important chart here. Let me show you with horizontal and vertical axis. So you can see the carbon emission. And you can see China is only 1/3 or even 1/4 of that of the US. But we should also consider the difficulty for future development. If you look the rest of the world, you can see we have similarity internationally. That's why it's necessary for us to promote by making joint efforts to promote the low carbon economy. in this global context, we can do a lot of things and we have a lot of thoughts. For example, we should have a better balance between carbon emission reduction and development, and we should further promote green development and carbon neutrality and the relation between the two. And we should be brave enough to take the responsibility to guarantee the initiatives. And next, I would like to share with you, my team and I had a chance to go through what happened and also to take a historical and national level of carbon-related issues to have a better understanding of this issue. And we have held successively altogether 9 events or 9 sessions to discuss. And we involved the industry of commerce, science and technology, agriculture, finance, gardening of the People's Republic of China, and also the different authorities. And we have issued differentiated policies, which have all been included in this report. We also had a chance to take a provincial level research approach. I think that's very valuable. I don't think before we achieve that, anyone or any organization have done the similar thing in the research industry. Number 4, we had a chance to go through the 3 parts of the industry and also the updates here to share with you. So it's about industry and manufacturing taking up 25th, second, and transportation about 40%, and also 3 to 7% of agriculture industry. So that's why once we figure out the difference between the industries when it comes to the specific statistics of carbon emission, and also we had a chance to have a deep dive into the financial area. And we have witnessed the industrial upgrading, for example, the green the green credits, the green bonds, which have been illustrated by the speakers earlier this evening. Last but not least, a number of research institutions have been widely exploring carbon neutrality theories and practice, and we have witnessed the passion and efforts made by the academia, and they have carried out a lot of research. And just in the past year alone, over 1,000 related dissertations or essays were published. More importantly, many organizations issued the carbon neutrality related report to the public. And my organization, of course, is part of them. And we were very honored to work together with our partners, which is a company working on big data. And we established a platform for monitoring, which was established first in Renmin in Sichuan province. So later on, we are going to invite one specific guest to introduce to you what happened ever since the establishment of that pilot center in Renmin, Sichuan province. And we going to share with you in the report what is the value of carbon neutrality for macro and micro development for China. More importantly, it means the big changes, or let's call it a big revolution for not just China, but also for Chinese people as well as Chinese people's lifestyle. So thank you so much for your listening. That's all I would like to share at this moment. Thank you again. So now, please allow me to introduce to you Zigong City. Actually, it's a small county located in Zigong City, which is called Rongxian, Rong County, in Zigong City, Sichuan Province. And we are very honored to have Secretary of Rongxian County Party Committee. We just received Madam Secretary's video not an hour ago. Distinguished leaders, guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for the invitation of RDCY. It's a great privilege for me to share with you. Rongxian County is a very important county to protect the drinking water and agricultural products here. For the past years, we guarantee the low carbon development and also to seek the balance because we have the challenges between the new growth momentum and environmental protection. So thanks to the central government, we have put on top of our agenda the low carbon development and agriculture counties. Our focus were governmental guidance, technological evolution, as well as market leading. So cultivation and food safety, as well as agriculture output. For example, less than 1,000 per mu, about 0.6 arc. So we want to turn the grain growing or food growing to the money in our pocket. That's why we want to reduce the use of fertilizers and also the rice and the vegetable upgrading, which were very helpful to guarantee the grain yield and to increase the vegetable income, the pesticides and the fertilizer reduction. So we have established the base of paddy and dry rotation, and farmers per capita, the exportation is above the average of the total country. Rice fish and rice shrimp combination and the different business modes have also been initiated and identified. And we have become one of the leading countries or the pioneers to abide by the initiative of the central government, and also technological empowerment and energy upgrading were our focus. Chinese baijiu is one of our advantage product and specialty. So we, with the coal transferring to gas, and also we cooperating with the universities like the Jingdezhen Ceramic University, the introduction of automatic intelligent tunnel king technology equipment. So product yield rate 88% climbed up to 95%. So increase the efficiency, the yield, as well as the better or favorable business environment for a better circulation. So for brands Langjiu, Wuliangye, and Maotai, we was honored to have a chance to cooperating with them and achieved the market share increase up to 40%. Country's clay was approved by the central government as the state trademark office. And also we upgrade our resource allocation.
And also, as for our county, we have Asia's largest salt land, and It has a lot of different mineral elements, and in the past, we relied on coal to produce the salt and some other, material. And with the policies and the technology subsidies, we have introduced the natural gas from the coal, and also together with Tsinghua University, we have improved the scientific content of our products. At the same time, we have actively developed the clean energy to optimize the energy mix. Dear guests, friends, carbon neutrality is the intensive and extensive economic and social transformation during the 14th five-year plan period. Rong County would continue to combine the market and government to promote low carbon development. So this is a long journey. It needs the support and assistance from you all. On this occasion, I welcome you to visit Rong County to give us more insights, and we warmly welcome you in Rong County. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Zheng. Why we choose Rong County? Because actually, Rongxian is the hometown for the first president of China Renmin University each year. Our officials would visit our former presidents in Rong County, and so we focus on the low carbon and green development of this small county. And 1 week ago, we had signed the further cooperation agreement with Rong County to promote the green development. And as for the foreign experts, you could see that China is honoring our promise to realize carbon neutrality. As for the governments and enterprises at all levels, we are making efforts to promote energy transformation in China. So that's it for this round. And now let's move on to the next session. And we have invited so many heavyweights, ambassadors, and scholars who will join this following session. So I would invite my colleague Jia Jingjing, Assistant Dean of RDCY, to moderate this session. Let's welcome. Thank you, Mr. Wang, for your introduction. And now let's move on to the thematic discussion round, and the topic is climate change and China's development. We have the following 9 speakers, and I would introduce them one by one, and they are the heavyweights. First, the Bangladesh ambassador to China, Mahbub Zaman, and ambassador of Sri Lanka to China, Palata Kohona, and Professor Li Zheng, Executive Vice President, Institute of Climate Change and Sustainable Development at Tsinghua University, John Ross, the former Director of Economic and Business Policy of London, Senior Fellow of RDCY, Mr. Liu Ke, Fellow of the Australian Academy of Science, Dean of School of Innovation and Entrepreneurship at Southern University of Science and Technology, Radhika Desai, Professor, Department of Political Studies, University of Manitoba, Canada, and Zhai Yongping, former Chief of Energy Sector Group, Asian Development Bank, Peter Koenig, former Senior Economist of the World Bank, and Mei Dewen, General Manager of China Beijing Green Exchange. And some of them are present here. Others are joining us through this through the online meeting, and so they may come from different time zones. And right now it is almost 10 o'clock at night in Beijing. So I'd like to thank the previous speakers. Thank you for your, thank you for being mindful of the time. And I hope that as for the following 9 heavyweights, please control your time within 5 to 8 minutes. And today we may be mindful of the timing for today's live seminar. So let's welcome the first speaker and Bangladesh Ambassador to China, Mr. Zaman. Let's welcome.
Excellencies, distinguished experts, academics, ladies and gentlemen, it's really a pleasure to be here at this Renmin University of China organized this seminar. And actually, the main theme was carbon neutrality, China in action. So under this sub-theme, we have this, climate change, one of the impact or the effect of this global warming. We see that on September 22, 2020, Chinese President Mr. Xi Jinping had put forward a solemn pledge at the UNGA session that China will scale up its intended nationally determined contributions by adopting more vigorous policies and measures, and to have CO2 emission peak before 2030 and achieve carbon neutrality before 2060. So at this climate ambition summit held in December 2020, President Xi Jinping further announced that some further commitments for this 2030, that China will lower its carbon dioxide emissions per unit of GDP by over 65% from the 2005 level, and increase the share of non-fossil fuels in primary energy consumption to around 25%, and increase the forest stock volume by 6 million cubic meters from the 2005 level, and bring its total installed capacity of solar and wind power to over 1.2 billion kilowatts. So that's very solemn pledge, and it covers all aspects or the fields of renewable energy also. So we see that there is a clear-cut commitment from China, and China indeed deserves appreciation for sensitizing the global community about the hazards of the looming climate change and its adverse impacts. It's such a huge topic that once one is always constrained for time. So I will just focus today on the climate change aspects, and about the greenhouse gas emissions, which is the main cause of the global warming. That I was just reading a book and a report by the China where it was said that in a blue paper that published by China Meteorological Administration, that China saw increasingly extreme precipitation in the past 60 decades. And it further added that extreme weather conditions like heavy precipitation and high temperatures are increasingly on the rise. This is also what is also said by the IPCC report, that we will see gradual rise in the global level of temperatures. And this is very much alarming. Previously, we thought that we are safe. And so long as we are not caught in some disaster or some dangerous situation, we thought we were safe. But now this climate change is something that it transcends barriers, boundaries. Nobody is safe. And until and unless we cooperate together, we cannot escape this. And my previous speakers have all said about this, that the watchword or the magic word is international cooperation. We should have some finally agreed targets. And what is more alarming, that even if we adhere to this climate peak, greenhouse gas peaking, that is not enough. The damage is already been done. So how we can further minimize the damage and we reach carbon neutrality by a certain period of time. Today, this is just a highlight on the climate change aspects. So further, having read the report, it says that continuing climate warming and increasing risks of extreme weather occurrences emanate from 5 main aspects. So it is to be noted. One is the atmosphere, hydrosphere, cryosphere, biosphere, and climate change drivers. In 2020, the global average temperature was 1.2 degrees higher than the average level of the pre-industrial period. This is very alarming, and it was also one of the 3 warmest, years. Having read the report of the China's national climate change, we see that he says that theoretically, every 1 degree Celsius increase in temperature will basically increase the water holding capacity of the atmosphere by 7%, which will lead to heavy precipitation. And while China's total precipitation in the past 60 years, he says that has not shown an obviously increasing trend, but the heavy rainfall shows an evident rise. So we have already seen that there are incessant rains, extreme climatic conditions, which is affecting all of us. This is not just a localized thing in China, but globally we are witnessing it. So it is already affecting nearly every part of the planet, and definitely human activities are the underlying cause. And the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says that unless there are immediate, rapid, and large-scale reductions in the greenhouse gas emission (GHGs), the goal of limiting global warming to about 1.5 degrees Celsius or even 2 degrees Celsius will prove to be beyond reach. So it may be beyond our grasp. So we have to take immediate action. So in the interest of time, I will be brief because there are a lot of other speakers also. I have carefully prepared the speech or reports compiling many issues from the different climate change reports. I will request you, and I leave it to this center for circulation at a period of time. And just I would like to share also what Bangladesh is doing in this regard, because you see that Bangladesh is not a global emitter of greenhouse gas emissions. We contribute a minuscule percent, a very, very small, negligible fraction of the total greenhouse gas emissions. So like us, all other developing countries, which are subjected to GHG emissions, global warming. So we are clamoring for adaptation strategies because mitigation is not a focus for us, because we have to adapt to the reality. We have to adapt to the newly situation. So our Honorable Prime Minister has set a target of achieving a developed country status by the year 2041. And we are on track to achieve the sustainable development goals, the 17 sustainable goals by 2030. And we are very careful about the environmental aspects which are included in the sustainable development goals. We have a SDG tracker, through the online system where we can monitor and record that how far we are and what has to be done. And we have an interministerial also coordination committee to achieve the sustainable development goals, which is very important, which will help us to jump, propel, and achieve the green aspirations, the environmental conservations. So we have also set up the global, we are a member of the Global Climate Fund and Global Environment Facilities. But let me tell you that Bangladesh is very much exposed to this because we are a deltaic country. We do have a 2030 delta plan, which would try to save our deltaic regions. But some of the rivers are of transboundary in nature. We do not control the flow of the rivers. So we are trying to get a plan coordinated with regional cooperation to coordinate and and set everything right. So actually, I've almost exhausted my time, but for the brevity of time and for the other speakers, I will end at that. And I will just end by a conclusion that Bangladesh is very much committed to conserve the nature, and we are very much conscious about the climate hazards and the climate change effects. We are always support the cooperation And we are, though we are one of the most climate vulnerable countries of the world, CVF Forum Bangladesh is the chair, but we extend our hands for cooperation, and support to control these natural hazards. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you very much for your speech. And now let's welcome Ambassador of Sri Lanka to China, Parita Kohana. Let's welcome.
Excellency, distinguished guests, we have been given a topic that requires not just 7 or 8 minutes, but a lot more than that. But given that it is very late in the day, I'll try to be brief. During an unusually mild Paris December in 2015, over 195 countries led by the US and China agreed on a set of broad measures to address the fast gathering threat to human existence of global warming and climate change. The Global Summit of World Leaders held a few weeks previously in 2015 had adopted the ambitious Sustainable Development Goals. While the media generally tended to treat these two events as independent from each other, the SDGs, which interface across the spectrum, are also linked to efforts to address climate change and global warming. The link must be kept in mind, especially in the cases of adaptation and mitigation. The oceans, inter alia, are the major influence on weather patterns, the biggest sink of greenhouse gases, the predominant source of protein for humanity, and a major employment generator. The sustainable use of oceans, seas, and marine resources must be kept in mind when addressing climate change and global warming. In Paris, the international community committed itself by consensus to curtail GHG emissions and limit global warming to 2 degrees Celsius by 2050, with an aspirational target of 1.5 Celsius. 188 countries pledged to implement measures unilaterally to realize this goal. Carbon neutrality was the objective. Now, importantly, developed countries agreed to provide 100 billion to developing countries by 2020 for adaptation and mitigation, and at least that amount afterwards. The most vulnerable countries will receive over 250 million. These figures refer only to funds to be made available through public sources. The question is, have these funds been made available at all to date? In a world where, embarrassingly, over 1 billion people still live on less than $1.25 a day, approximately 800 million go to bed hungry, 795 million, or 1 in 9 humans, remain malnourished, 57 million children have no access to education, 2.4 billion live without proper toilet facilities, 663 million lack access to safe water, 1/3 of all schools lack safe water and toilet facilities, millions of women still die at childbirth, and many more children do not reach their 5th birthday, while 62 individuals own more wealth than the poorest 3.2 billion people on earth. Realizing the SDGs may turn out to be simply too daunting. one silver thread against this background of suffocating gloom is China's success in eliminating absolute poverty through its own efforts. The Addis Ababa Conference on Funding for Development having country-specific programs for its client countries. The US has pledged 800 million. What has been offered still falls far short of the 100 billion that is agreed to be made available by 2020. The Asian Infrastructure Bank and the China International Development Cooperation Agency have a clear focus on assisting renewable energy development. Green finance loans have excelled $1 trillion
Here. Strategy and the contemporary China and world studies at China International Publishing Groups, China Renmin University, and also Mr. Wang Xiao with us. He and his team had a chance to summarize what happened in the industry regarding carbon neutrality. I felt this report is very significant because we should seek peaceful development and identify good products to provide the China way or Chinese wisdom to curb the climate change and global warming. Are
提高到25%，这样来确保来讲呢，这个我们能够在2030年前达峰。之后来讲呢，这个需要进一步的加强这个减碳的力度，尤其是发展这个非化石能源的力度。那么实行一个来讲呢，以这个跟巴黎协定这个目标相一致的2度和1.5度目标为导向的一个长期的深度的减排的这个路径，来实现这个2060年的这个碳中和。所以就是实际上是个2步走。第一步来通过这个发展可再生能源和其他非化石能源这个通过加速实现碳达峰之后呢，再进一步加速，那么实现一个这个长期的深度的减排策略，减排路径。那么这个路径来讲呢，应该这个刚才我代表习主任发言的时候已经讲过了，实际上是非常非常有难度的。但是这个我们言必行，这个我们一定会这个尽最大努力来实现这个目标。那么要想实现这样的一个过程来讲呢，那么这个策略来讲，主要其实也就是有3方面。第一方面来讲呢，就是这个能源系统的转型首当其冲。 因为两的这个二氧化碳排放量的70%多的70到80%的比例量都是来自于这个能源系统，所以能源系统的转型是首当其冲。所以一方面来讲呢，我们大力的发展非化石能源，尤其是风能、太阳能这种可再生能源。另一方面来讲呢，那么我们要去把握好传统的能源，它也除了碳排放好之外呢，实际上这个
energies actually in terms of the stability and the traditional fuels are better, so we need to strike a balance between the fossil fuels and non-fossil fuels. It is energy system to decarbonize the current energy system in terms of the demand side, such as transportation, facilities, buildings, and so on. In those sectors, through the advanced processes and energy-saving equipment, as well as the energy consumption framework, we could promote low-carbon development in the society. Third, we need to promote a carbon sink. Through afforestation and reforestation, we could achieve it. From the supply side, we need to change the energy system. In terms of the demand side, we need to promote renewable energies as well as the carbon sink. So these are the three measures to achieve this goal. There are 10 approaches. First, due to the time constraint, I will name a few. First, to adjust the energy system, we should shift from the fossil fuel to the non-fossil fuel. In the near future, we may mainly rely on the non-fossil fuels such as solar, wind power, hydropower, and so on. And then we need to change and upgrade our industrial system. So as for the same products, we would adopt the low carbon technologies to produce the products so that we could produce the products with more added value in terms of transportation, industries, steel, and some other building sectors. With the carbon emissions in those areas, we can, reduce the carbon emissions. And also, circular economy is very important. Through circular economy, we could reduce the demand of production so that we could reduce the energy consumption and emissions. And we need to have the taxation, supportive policies, and some other accommodative policies. Carbon market is the efficient approach to realize a lower cost of emission reduction. And in China, we have launched the nationwide carbon market, including the power sector. And so Middle Wen would mention it. And also, we could improve the carbon sink to realize the carbon neutrality. Through our efforts, we could minimize the carbon emissions so that it could be offset by the carbon sink to realize the neutrality. We need to set up the target and the countermeasures, and then from the supply and demand side, as well as the carbon sink, we could find a way out. So we have the 10 approaches. So that's it for my part to share with you. Thank you all. Thank you, Professor Li's speech. And then we'll have the following 5 foreign experts who join us through the virtual conference. I hope that we could be mindful of the time. Because we can't, extend this meeting. And now let's welcome John Ross, former Director of Economic and Business Policy of London, Senior Fellow of RDCY. Let's welcome.
Okay, thank you. I was going to, well, that's rather difficult because I was going to show some screens. I just received slides and I've just been sent a message that the screen sharing is disabled. Right, fine. Okay, let me. Okay, but it still says that the screen sharing is disabled. Okay, well, right. Sorry, there's also some very bad feedback. Right, I hope you can hear me. It's going to be difficult to do it without the ability to show the screen, so I'll just have to try to do things verbally. Right, okay. Myself. Can people hear me? Because it's not clear because it says the host. Fine. Okay, right. Thank you. President Xi sent out the clear goals that China set for climate change. What I want to look at is what are some of the obstacles which exist to this. I don't mean this by this technical obstacles. I mean because the question of achieving zero carbon requires major changes within the world. I take it that the only framework which can work is what one might call carbon democracy. That is, every person on the planet is entitled to the same amount of carbon emissions. Any other thing will, any other system will institutionalize inequality between countries, inequality between nations, and even inequality between races in some cases. So therefore, that won't be viable. So let's look at what are the actual problems. The first one is, let's look at who is historically responsible for climate change. Basically, if you look at that, it is 90% the responsibility of the developed countries. If you take the territorial emissions of CO2 by gigatons, it is 1.28 gigatons per capita of the United States, for example, compared to 0.14 for China. That means the US has 6 times the world average emissions per capita historically, and 9 times China's per capita. But we also know that territorial emissions are not the best way to measure CO2 emissions, because countries can offshore their production, and therefore it's better to measure it by carbon consumption. If you look at that, then you find historically the US has 11 times greater historical emissions per capita than China, and it has 6 times the world average. This therefore means that if you look, even this does understates the situation, because this level of emissions is dangerously high. You can calculate the emissions above the average historically, and the United States accounts for 40% of these, and the whole of the developing world accounts for only 8%. Right. Therefore, as I say, the fundamental point is that historically 90% of the responsibility for carbon emissions comes from the developed countries. Once you look at this, you find out that what is actually being proposed, particularly by the United States, is quite inadequate to deal with the situation. The United States has announced a target of 50 to 52% reduction from 2005 levels by 2030. But this means this is a reduction of 36% from its 2019 levels. But as we will see, this is historically quite inadequate. It is inadequate. For comparison, China's emissions per capita in 2019 were 7.3 tons. That is, the US is proposing a cut which would leave US emissions 42% higher than China's. So in other words, the actions which is proposed by the United States are quite inadequate. If you look at the, in percentage terms, if you take the US as 100%, then China has 45% the per capita emissions of the United States. Brazil has 14%. India has 12%. And the world has 29%. So the actual reductions proposed by the United States would leave the United States in an extremely privileged position vis-a-vis the rest of humanity. The US is not therefore playing a leading role in this. The US is playing a backward role in this. Okay. Let's look at, therefore, so far I've dealt with historical questions, but I'm going to go on now and look at it in terms of current emissions. The best estimate made by scientists to keep the level of emissions to 1.5 degrees is that each human being can emit 2.3 tons of carbon. So let's look at what are the level of reductions which are required. Incidentally, if you take another figure than 2.3 tons per person, that will alter the absolute figures, but it won't alter the ranking of countries. If you look at that, the number of advanced countries, the total number of countries which must cut carbon emissions is 115. Number of countries which can increase carbon emissions is 89. But if you look at it between the developed countries and the developing countries, 99% of developed countries will have to cut their emissions. Incidentally, if anybody wants to know, the only one that doesn't have to is Uruguay. And the total number of developing countries that can increase their per capita emissions is 66%. So 99% of developed countries would have to reduce their carbon emissions, and only 34% of developing countries would have to do so. If you now look at it from the point of view of working downwards, from the countries that have to make the biggest cuts to get to the 2.3 tons, the situation is even clearer. 17 out of the 21 countries that require more than 80% reductions are advanced. By far the highest is the United States. Only 4 developing countries amongst those which need to present 80% cuts, because 80% is the real level of cut that the United States needs to make to get down to its average for the world. It's 86% cut. That is the only one which would bring the United States into line with the situation of other countries. Of the countries which require 70 to 80% reduction, 16 of them are advanced countries. So to take a summary, 32 out of the 40 countries which require the biggest percentage reductions in carbon emissions, that is 75% of the countries that have to make such cuts, are advanced economies. And the US requires the biggest cut of all major economies. The statistics are presented in a way which disguises these realities, or as they're presented, for example, by the United States. It talks about percentage reductions, but this is not adequate at all, because of course the US has by far the highest level of emissions, and all the developed countries have developed countries have high levels of emissions. So the cuts for the developed countries, are much, much greater than those for the developing countries. Only when you get down to the countries which have got to make 1 to 38% reductions do you find that the number of developing countries is bigger than the number of developed countries. Therefore, just to summarize, there is a lot more that can be said, but I want to try to stick to the time. I'm sorry I couldn't show the slides because it makes it harder to follow. What it shows is, therefore, the achievement of carbon neutral requires an enormous shift in the structure of the world economy, because it is the developed countries which have to make by far the biggest hits and the cuts, and so far they are trying to avoid doing so. And this is the major, what we may call geopolitical obstacle involved in the question of achieving carbon neutrality. Again, I'm sorry that it's difficult to follow without the slides, but I hope it was at least the main points we're able to get across. Thank you very much.
啊，非常感谢罗思义先生，带来的精彩的演讲。虽然有一些技术上的阻碍，但是我们克服气候危机的 努力是这个没有受到阻碍的。接下来有请澳大利亚科学院士、南方科技大学创新创业学院院长刘科先生。
能听见我讲话吧？好，那我现在共享一下我的这个，主持人能请允许我共享一下我的屏幕。屏幕可以共享吗？
Can you see my screen sharing? Moderator, could you please help me sharing my screen? Yes, I think you can share the screen. There is a window pop-up, window sign. You're not allowed by the moderator to share your screen slides. So can anyone help me here? Could you please try again? Oh, okay, it's working now finally. Thank you. So 8 minutes. My sharing is about the reality and path of carbon neutrality. I was invited by the Shenzhen municipal government and authority to deliver a speech on occasion. And the carbon trade, so media coverage of the different titles and headlines. But now I would like to focus on the reality, severe reality of carbon neutrality. So for a family with 3 people on average, here are the figures for carbon emission. A very important thing I want to we have the carbon calculation authority. If you test and calculate each of the single organization or companies' carbon emission, I don't think that's a realistic way to do this thing. I think we should have a clear picture of electricity consumption and also the coal consumption and then gas. And every year, how about your annual consumption of the coal, gas, or for each of the factory? I think that's a feasible way to have statistics for your coal consumption. Like total, the last line, 92% of the total carbon emission. That means we can do things to cut the cost. I don't think it's a feasible way to establish a carbon test or carbon emission calculation authority from national level, central government level, provincial level, city level, and then county level. Because I don't think you can guarantee the consistency or you can record the history. So this chart is a more cost-effective way for you to calculate the carbon emission. And the second point I want to share is that to increase more green lines, for example, some lines in the past, maybe no forest there, are not good use of that green line, that line, but you can turn it into green line because the households are using air conditioners a lot. And also the energy is very important for power generation. Wind, solar power, water. I used to work with the organization. Which was sold afterwards. So I would say hydro energy. Can anyone help me? I can hear some echoes here. So I just want to double check with the online friends. Can you also echoes or noise there? So, or can I move on? Okay, let me move on. So for the dams, some of the water dams were tore down, and also the nuclear power is very costly. So of course, confidential issue again. Wind and solar power, these two kinds of energy, of course, because of the quantity increase, so we can see the reduction of the cost for the two energies. Then that's why some people argue, oh, it is high time for us to achieve the carbon neutrality goal for the whole country. 8,760 hours for the whole country. So on average, about 1,500 hours for solar power generation time. So that's why I said, yes, solar energy is not that expensive as it was in the past. However, about 0.1 yuan for the wind energy. So the selling price of the electricity generated by wind power, you should also consider the energy structure. It's just equivalent to 12% of the coal generation. So that's why I say it's severe reality. If we don't seek any breakthroughs of the energy storage area, then we're going to see more or the worsen phenomenon of industries in wind power. And I don't think we can only rely on sales to help us to storage the electricity, because the invention of sales in the past 1 century alone already cost the whole human being trillions of dollars. So we spent 1 year for R&D of the sales, but we don't think we have made enough money in the area. And for the sales, production of the whole world cannot even meet the demands. So Elon Musk have emphasized on different occasions about electricity sales, but if we cannot reduce the cost of energy storage, electricity storage, no matter to what degree you develop the solar energy and wind energy, we don't think it can solve the problem fundamentally. So again, that's the key issue we should consider. Many scholars have put forward concepts that we can transfer carbon dioxide to other kinds of energy. 13% of the oil mining has led to the chemicals. So it may be more expensive. So to improve the energy efficiency is a very important way to achieve the goal of carbon neutrality, but we don't think we have reduced the carbon dioxide emission. Instead, we have tripled or even more times that we consumed and produced in the past. So again, 67% of the state grid rely on coal generation. I don't think that's the solution. So let me skip this part of slides. So hydrogen natural gas, wind, and solar power. But hydrogen and oxygen are the most expensive for the factories and manufacturers. So if we have makeup solutions for, or the backup solutions for this energy lack in the industry regularly, then that means we can make impulse. So again, please allow me to skip this kind of slides. We can allocate. That means it's not a centralized way of generating electricity. For example, we have 300 kilowatt hours for seasons like winter. So I think the centralized way will at least help us as the core power plants. And if we storage the energy in the liquid way, for example, the wind energy, and also allocate the resources, that is the thermal electricity coexistence to provide better energy. So we will finally walk out of the shadow of energy problem. And it's not just a slogan, a buzzword, but actually the feasible way. Otherwise, everything we're talking about here will just become nonsense. So, because in the interest of time, I think I should pause here. Thank you very much, Mr. Liu Ke. It's a very important occasion to share each of your observations. So I'm sure you're going to find more ways or channels to add points after this seminar. So next, let's welcome our next speaker. RDCY.
Yes,
the floor
hello.
is now yours.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
So we can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I would like to, I'm hearing an echo back. Can this be corrected? I'm hearing myself being echoed back. Let me try again. Yeah, the echo is not going away. Okay, that's better. No, it's okay. Let me try. Well, thank you very much. Thanks to the organizers of this important webinar. I'm very happy to contribute my thoughts to this about this critically important report and about this critically important topic. President Xi's announcement today about not building new coal-fired power plants is another major milestone, which even the normally hostile Western press has had to praise. Of the three major components of the ecological emergency that the world faces, namely climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution, the past summer and the upcoming COP26 make climate change the most urgent. Since the 2015 Paris Agreement to limit the rise in average global temperatures to no more than 2 degrees, preferably 1.5 degrees, and to achieve worldwide carbon neutrality by between 2050 and 2100, progress has been woefully slow. UN Secretary General Guterres has recently asked for an emergency level action. However, internationally, the situation is grave. And in my remarks, I want to focus on some critically important reasons why, and also on why I think China is taking a path that is much to be commended. As most of you appreciate, the transition from the Trump to the Biden administrations has turned out to be not much of a transition at all. On the most critically important issues, the new administration is following in the footsteps of the old. The Biden administration continues not only to antagonize China, Russia, and other traditional antagonists, but also many of its own allies by its inconsistent behavior, as for instance, we can see more recently in the reaction to France with the new treaty announced between the US, UK, and Australia. President Biden's first speech at the United Nations was no exception. Such cooperation as he offered, such leadership as he offered to the tune of his America is Back message was directed at viewers outside the US, but it was drowned out by the aggressive posture and tone that he adopted for those who were listening at home. President Biden can only cut an increasingly incoherent, schizophrenic, and unreliable figure abroad. It is the result of the domestic mess that 40 years of neoliberal economic policies and aggressive foreign policies aimed at serving American corporations and their increasingly desperate search for profits abroad have created. Over these 40 years of neoliberal policy, domestic economy, society, politics, and culture have been woefully neglected. And this is what creates the bind in which all presidents must operate. Since the US is one of the biggest contributors to climate change, this is very serious. And US contributions have to be considered not just today, but historically. Not only is the US among the biggest emitters, it is politically configured in such a way as to be unable to offer much help in mitigating it. As a capitalist society and as a capitalist state, the US seems able to commit only to those measures to mitigate climate change that prove profitable to its big corporate capitalists. Thanks to a corrupt electoral system vitiated by the power of money and the media, the US state has become such an abject servant of the top echelons of the corporate capitalist class, and it must serve it as it exists. It cannot even regulate this class in the interest of the broader capitalist class, let alone impose regulations for the benefit of American citizens or the rest of humanity. This corporate class remains committed to forms of production that rely on the most intense exploitation of labor and the most intense squandering of natural resources. It remains committed to forms of financialization that have the same effect. In this context, China is to be commended for its calm and stabilizing behavior at the international level. At Paris in 2015, China committed to ensuring that CO2 emissions would peak around 2030. And it agreed to accelerate carbon neutrality so that CO2 emissions per unit of GDP fall by 60 to 65% compared to 2005. A year ago, President Xi at the United Nations General Assembly committed China to achieving carbon neutrality by 2060, including through replacing fossil energy use with wind and solar power and increasing China's forest stock. Today, he has marked another milestone by committing to cease building coal power plants. China is doing this despite being a historically tiny emitter. It is blazing a path to what I call the precocious modernity that the third world will have to achieve, achieving higher standards of living in a shorter time, much less waste, much less consumerism, and much less ecological destruction. With these commitments and the elaboration of the idea of an ecological civilization, the full apparatus of China's party state is now geared towards repairing what Karl Marx called human society's metabolism with nature, so that the planet remains inhabitable. There is an ecological emergency. Science says so, and China is convinced. It is not only doing its part, it is demonstrating a form of leadership that is sorely needed in a cool, calm, collected, rational, and scientific manner. It does not need the hullabaloo of a world where school children accuse adults of neglecting the environment, when in fact it is the capitalist classes who are causing the environmental destruction. This is possible because China is socialist in a meaningful sense. Because unlike capitalist societies hurtling onward into history, powered by their contradictions and forces that they cannot control but which control them, China is in command of itself. That socialism will be necessary to address climate change and the rest of the ecological emergency is clear from the words of my friend and colleague Salvatore Engel Di Mauro, whose recent book, Socialist States and the Environment, argues that historically, socialist states, especially on a per capita basis, have had a much less destructive environmental impact overall than capitalist countries. And they also managed to improve their environmental records over time, in spite of being under incessant attack from liberal democracies. So let me conclude by saying, way to go, socialist China, lead on. Thank you very much.
感谢德赛教授。接下来有请亚洲开发银行前首席能源专家、腾讯战略发展部高级顾问
Mr. Zhang Yongping, former chief of Energy Sector Group, Asia Development Bank. Let's welcome. I'm Zhang Yongping. Thank you for your invitation. And it's quite late in Beijing right now. And I will spend 6 minutes talking about 3 main points. In African Development Bank and Asian Development Bank, I worked there for 3 decades in the area of energy. In July, I just came back to China. In Tencent, I continue to make contribution to carbon neutrality. Today, I will not mention my new job in Tencent. I'd like to talk about the energy transformation in developing countries. Professor Liu Ke mentioned the technology issues. I'd like to mention the human development in this area. First, low carbon transformation. We should be people-oriented as for education, transportation and so on. We need energy. When I worked in developing countries, in those poor countries, the energy consumption is quite low. So right now, actually 940 million people do not have the electricity, and 300 million people do not have the clean water to do the cooking. So double carbon targets should put people first. We should provide them with the decent life, with the clean water and resources. In China, we have not solved it 100% in some remote areas in China. When I visited there, of course, the views are beautiful. If you go to the kitchens, they may use traditional fuels to do the cooking. So in China, we're still the developing country, and we need to make more efforts. We hope that every country is facing the carbon peak and neutrality with different time schedules. I hope that before carbon peak, first, you should ensure that 100% of your people have the power to use and also have the clean water to cook. Secondly, in terms of the low carbon transformation, in this whole process, China could play the important roles in 3 aspects. First, China could offer the available clean energy technology for BRI countries such as PV. Over the past 10 years, PV cost has been down by 90%. It is a contribution made by China to the whole world. As for this reduction, first, we have China's policies to support it. We have the scale of economies. Chinese entrepreneurs seize this opportunity to reduce the cost of PV. Therefore, PV has been popularized around the world. In wind power, installed batteries, and some other areas, China would play the similar roles. So China would rely on its markets and indigenous technologies to reduce the cost of those renewables. From another perspective, China has adequate funds to provide BRI countries with clean energy. As for Chinese Development Bank, its capital is bigger than World Bank. As for our development bank, our green finance in total has surpassed the total of the international counterparts in terms of the BRI projects, energy area. Our investment is massive. Yesterday, President Xi announced that in the near future, we focus on the clean energy renewables in BRI projects. So we do not support the coal plants. Furthermore, more and more funds will flow into renewables. In addition, what's more important is that China is the global manufacturer. China has a lot of funds, and also China has the most advanced development mindset and best business models. We spent a generation in realizing second society to realize 100% electricity usage, and much progress been made in realizing clean air and water. In this process, what are the takeaways and experience? What are the mistakes? Our experts and scholars should accumulate those experiences and lessons learned. We hope that in the transformation of the low carbon development, we could better spread those Chinese experience and best practices. In the end, I would like to mention that in so many aspects, China is different from the developed countries. We are facing some competition and contradictions, but there is one common thing, that is we should put people first to realize this low carbon development and energy transformation. Be it developing or developed countries, no matter what are the interest differences, to support the low carbon transformation of developing countries, we have the same interests involved here. We should join our hands to solve the people-oriented transformation of our energy. Thank you, Mr. Zhai. Now let's welcome Peter Koenig, former senior economist of the World Bank. Let's welcome.
Okay, thank you very much for having me.
好的，可以，请您开始，谢谢。
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you clearly. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for having me participate in this important conference. An early priority for China, at least 2 or 3 decades back, was to reduce carbon dioxide output, as well as that of other greenhouse gases such as methane, nitrous oxide, ozone, some artificial chemicals, and so on. To eventually reach carbon neutrality, meaning eliminating as much CO2 as is produced by 2050. The output of CO2 and other greenhouse gases has increased rapidly, and especially in later years, and this despite repeated pledges during numerous UN-sponsored environmental conferences to reduce the world's carbon footprint. Global carbon dioxide levels reached 419 parts per million, ppm, in May 2021, the highest since CO2 output has been measured 63 years ago. Compare this to China's CO2 output of 409 by 2018. China is often blamed as being the world's largest polluter, which may be the case in absolute terms, as China also has the world's largest population. However, putting China's CO2 output in perspective, on a per capita basis, China ranks only 3rd after the US and Russia. And put that in figures, the US puts out 15.5 tons per capita, Russia 11.3, China 7.4 more or less, and India 1.9. So China has about half the output per capita or less than the US. China's 14th five-year plan, published in March 2021, included 2025 energy and carbon intensity reduction targets, as well as a midpoint non-fossil share target to achieve her what is called nationally determined contributions. At China's Leaders Climate Summit in April 2021, President Xi Jinping announced that China will strictly control coal generation until 2025, when she will start gradually phase out coal. President Xi just announced now that China ceases using coal-powered plants as of now. To understand the concept and the lingo of different terms and terminologies, let me back up a little bit. It all began decades ago with the first United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, also known as the Earth Summit, held in Rio de Janeiro in June 1992. It set the stage for the reduction of greenhouse gases, the most important of which is CO2. CO2 emissions are toxic and harmful for the environment and life when produced in excesses. However, let's also keep in mind that CO2 is one of the most important gases on Earth because the plants use it to produce carbohydrates in a process called photosynthesis. I will get back to that later. Since humans and animals depend on plants for food, thus CO2 is necessary for the survival of life on Earth. In the meantime, there have been numerous climate change conferences around the world, most of them UN-sponsored. The latest one, if I'm not wrong, was the Santiago Climate Change Conference, the 25th so-called Conference of the Parties, COP25, last in December 2019, meaning that the 25th conference to the United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change. The names of these conferences and their results are often confusing, at times also controversial, especially between the industrialized countries and the so-called developing countries or the global south. A chief reason for potential conflicts is rapid industrialization, excessive consumption, and this particularly in the West or the global north. The output of CO2 and other greenhouse gases has increased rapidly and unequally between the global north and the global south. Yet, developing countries are often asked to take similar measures to reduce greenhouse gases, in particular CO2. A safe level of CO2 in the air, according to one of the first 21st century UN conferences, it may have been the 2009 Copenhagen conference, was suggested to be 350 ppm. This figure was already exceeded in 1987, reaching, as mentioned before, 419 ppm already in May of this year. Despite COVID, the concentration has not been significantly changed for the better, as was expected and pronounced by many politicians. In some cases, it has actually gotten worse. Despite pledges to the contrary, the main source of energy has changed little in the last 20 years. Hydrocarbons are still king. Today's world economy still depends on some 84% of hydrocarbons, which is petrol, gas, coal, of all energy used, and this compared to 86% at the turn of the century. So the result is not remarkable. What does carbon neutrality mean, actually? It means that the amount of CO2 emissions put into the atmosphere is the same as the amount of CO2 removed from the atmosphere. The impact is neutral. This is not making it actively worse, but it doesn't make it really much better either, especially when the average output is above 400 ppm, meaning above the considered safe target of 350 ppm. Carbon negative or carbon net zero might be a step in the right direction. It means the amount of CO2 removed from the atmosphere is bigger than the CO2 put into the atmosphere. The impact is positive. Something is actively done to reduce the harm to the atmosphere and to improve the air for every breathing life. We have the historical responsibility to urgently cleaning up the atmosphere to eventually get back to what is called the civilized level of 275 parts per million. Since the beginning of human civilizations, our atmosphere contained about 275 ppm of carbon dioxide, That's why it's called the civilized level. According to renowned climatologist Dr. James Hansen, these are the conditions under which civilization developed and to which life on Earth adapted. Going beyond this indicator risks disrupting our global climate systems of 1 million plus years of relative stability. Beginning in the 18th century, with the age of industrialization, humans began to burn coal, gas, and oil to produce energy and goods, and the consumption increased. So there was always more need for these hydrocarbons. The carbon in the atmosphere began to rise, at first slowly and then ever more rapidly. Many of the activities we do every day rely on energy sources that emit carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. We are redistributing millions and millions of years worth of carbon once stored beneath the earth as fossil fuels and releasing it into the atmosphere. Well, this is just a thought to think about. Apologies for the long introduction and background. As to China, China's Ministry of Environment and Ecology publishes regularly CO2 concentration levels. China's greenhouse gas emission in 2018, as mentioned before, was 409.4 ppm, with an estimated annual growth of 1.3%. While in full action towards carbon neutrality, China was hosting the 5th ministerial meeting on climate action in April 2021, a virtual event attended by the European Union, Canada, plus ministers and representatives from 35 governments and international organizations from all the world's regions. The meeting aimed at drastically reduce the carbon level in the air through significant shifts from fossil fuel energy to alternative sources for the upcoming UN Climate Change Conference, COP26, hosted by the UK from the 31st of October to the 12th of November of this year in Glasgow. The Glasgow conference will focus at implementing the Paris Agreement in a comprehensive, balanced, and effective manner, building a fair global climate governance system, equitable and centered on win-win cooperation with focus on renewable energy, the phase out of fossil fuels, zero emission vehicles, resilience building, carbon pricing, green finance, nature-based climate solutions such as afforestation and deforestation, biodiversity, conservation, and waste management. China is already pushing ahead with this agenda, way ahead. The ministers asked for an equitably transition throughout the implementation process. This may include financial, technological, and capacity building support to developing countries, especially the poorest and most vulnerable ones. Implementation of the Paris Agreement should also reflect the principle of common, differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities in the light of different national circumstances. China's ambitious agenda to reach carbon neutrality, or even better, by 2050, includes investing in projects of liquid hydrogen, which can be used, for instance, in hydrogen fuel cell automobiles, and hydrogen metallurgy, a technology that applies hydrogen instead of carbon. Third generation photovoltaic energy with efficiency above 40% is another sector where China's world-class development and vast demands may attract global investors. In addition, China has ambitious research projects already since a while ongoing into generating energy from photosynthesis. What I mentioned before, the process plants used to transform carbon dioxide and sunlight into energy. It's an ecosystem's way of producing fuel at high level of efficiency in excess of 90% actually, without polluting residues. Green parks in urban areas and reforestation, as well as improved water management so as to reduce areas of frequent droughts and convert them into green agricultural croplands. At the same time, China is seeking new alternative energy investments abroad, such as automotive lithium-ion battery production in Germany. That's an investment plan of about 1.8 billion euros, and much more. China is not only on the right track to seek environment-friendly renewable sources of energy, thus reducing her carbon footprint, but to exceed the 2050 net zero emission target into a carbon negative project. China, as in other matters of importance to the world societies, just to mention one, poverty alleviation, may be again an example on environmental progress towards a human society with shared benefits for all. Thank you.
好，感谢凯宁格先生。
Thank you so much, Mr. Koenig. So next speaker, let's welcome Mr. Mei Dewen, General Manager of China Beijing Grain Exchange, Secretary General for Beijing Grain Finance Association. Mr. Mei, the floor is now yours. Thank you so much, Professor Wang Wen, and thank you the organizer for inviting me here. I would like to take this opportunity to share with you China's market of carbon trade. So here is my title, Carbon Market under the Goal of Carbon Neutral, Challenges, Opportunities, and Prospects. So you can see three keywords here, challenges, opportunities, prospects, or if one more is the carbon market in China. So I would like to take up the following couple of minutes to cover the 3 or 4 parts of that. So for challenges, opportunities, status quo, and prospects, let me first explain part 1, challenges. China is seen as the world factory of manufacturing, 28% of the global manufacturing, and the fixed assets investment takes up 40%, at least 40% of the total GDP of the country. So I think we can divide countries like OECD countries or developed countries, rapid development and lower carbon emission. And for some African countries or poorer countries, is development and low carbon. And for China, if you consider the supply side and the demand side and the structure, you can see the development of China's economy is closely related to carbon emissions. So I would like to define China's mode as rapid development and high carbon emission. So here I have a concept, impossible trinity in macroeconomy. That means I don't think it's possible for our country to achieve the 3 goals simultaneously, namely middle high speed growth, green supply, and stable price. China is the largest developing economy and is the largest emitter of carbon dioxide and is the largest consumer of energy. So here comes the biggest contradiction for our country according to the curves in the theory of economy and environmental development. The EU achieved the goal of carbon peak 10 years after achieving that goal. EU embarked on this journey of carbon trade market. And our GDP per capita is about $20,000. So that means our income, our per capita haven't achieved that level or milestone for us to achieve the goal of carbon peak or carbon neutrality. That means we should make strenuous efforts to do the task of carbon neutrality. There is no other country like China with the total volume of 100 billion tons. So I think for the carbon peak of the US, maybe just 7 or 8 billion tons. So maybe we can estimate in the next 10 years, maybe the carbon emission can comes to the total number of 10.6 or 10.8 billion tons.
China has made a huge contribution to the carbon emission reductions around the world in terms of the opportunities. We have gone through 2 rounds of industrial revolution, and so according to the American famous scholar, right now we're at the 3rd industrial revolution, as led by new energy, information technology, biotechnology. So each time when we have the industrial revolution, we may see the changes in energy supplies and some other financial services. As for the 2nd industrial revolution, and we've seen the changes in the energy supplies, and the capital market has risen to the flame. And according to this scholar's viewpoint, this time, this revolution will be led by new energy and the new type of capital market as led by carbon market. China is harboring some technologies. China has the largest PV and wind facilities, and China has invested 600 billion to set up the ultra high voltage grid. And right now, in terms of the EV vehicles, China's cumulative sales stood at 5.5 million units, number 1 around the world for 4 years in a row. Therefore, as mentioned by Director Wang Wen, as for the green bond, 1 trillion, and carbon market, 4 billion tons, more than, twofold that of European counterparts in terms of the energy supply, transmission, trading, green energy market. We've seen some scales, as mentioned President Xi, and we could make our contribution to the low carbon development. And also, actually, we have this impossible triangle of energy. In China, in developing the renewable energy, we have the advantage in cost. With the efficiency of the energy transmission, the advantage in cost would strengthen. We do not have the sunk cost, especially in EV vehicles. We do not have the replacement cost, neither the sunk cost. In terms of the status quo, in terms of China's carbon market, actually the first phase from 2005 to 2012 for CDM market, from 2013 to last year. So in 8 provinces and cities, we have piloted the carbon trading markets, and the quote is about 1.2 billion tons, and so it involves 1,000 financing entities. The trading volume is about 11.4 billion RMB. And so the trading price is about 23.75 yuan. The turnover rate is about 5%. And just launched a nationwide carbon emission trading market. And the trading volume is about 52 RMB per ton. And so by comparison, in EU last year, it's about 8.1 billion tons in terms of the trading. And so we've seen the trading amount is about 201 billion euros. Therefore, trading volume and turnover rate, as well as the prices, compared with the advanced markets, so there's still a huge gap. In terms of the carbon trade market, it will have the large size, liquidity, and the price. If so, we could provide more liquidity and efficiency as well as consistency. So it is the status quo in the China's carbon market. To look ahead, actually, we have this kind of impossible triangle in terms of the monetary policy and the exchange rate, as well as the convertibility of the currency. And we cannot achieve the three at the same time. And that is the exchange rate, independent monetary policy, and the movement of the capital. So as for the carbon emission right, if would like to maintain the independence of this area, and in the near future, the carbon price will be up to the international standard, especially with the CBAM agreement. By 2023, EU would launch CBAM, and US is considering it to launch CBAM. And also, we have in terms of this impossible triangle of the energy in those aspects, so we believe that in the near future, the trading market volume, liquidity, and prices will be up to the international standard. And we will see higher prices and better liquidity in this market. And by 2050, in the national trading, markets, we will see more integration. It is our judgment on China's carbon market. And so we'll see more diversified products and internationalize the regulations. To sum up with two sentences, we all know that actually, according to German experts, and first you should think about the idea. You should go ahead of your action. And as for carbon neutrality, it's a new concept and idea. According to Bill Gates, and he loves this remark, and people may overestimate the short-term impact of the benefit of a new technology. Maybe it is true for carbon market. Thank you for your speech. And right now it's almost 11 o'clock at night in Beijing. And today, so many friends present here from China and friends. Thank you for your commitment and dedication. And so thank you for your commitment. Thank you for your efforts. That's it for today's live seminar. Thank you.